The Opel Manta is a rear-wheel drive sports coupe copyright motor vehicle built by Opel from 1970 to 1988. Manta. The Manta A was released in September 1970, 2 months ahead of the then-new Opel Ascona on which it was based. A competitor to the Ford Capri, it was a two-door three-box coupe copyright, and featured distinctive round tail lights, quite similar to those on the Opel GT and which in fact were used on the GT in 1973, its final model year. It was named for the Manta A. In the UK market, the first Manta was sold only as an Opel. There was no Vauxhall-branded Manta until after the launch, in 1975, of the Manta B1 and Ascona B. The sales approach for the Opel line in the US market was equally odd. The Manta A was one of only a few Opel models sold in the US market. Opels were imported by GM and sold through Buick dealerships and not their own dealership network, so they were limited in what makes and models they could sell there. Other Opel models sold in the US market were the 1956 Euro 61, the Record P1 and Record P2, the Cadet A, Cadet B, GT, Manta/Ascona A. The Ascona A is the saloon version on the Manta A chassis and was sold in the US under the 1900 name as a two-door and four-door saloon, and as a two-door sport wagon. The only difference between the Ascona and Manta was exterior sheet metal, glass and trim. The frame, all the mechanicals, dash, front seats, and many other parts were shared between the cars. The Manta was even sold as the 1900 Sport Coupe copyright in 1971 and 1972, rather than as the Manta. In 1973 the Manta nameplate was added to the US spec Mantas, but the Asconas kept the 1900 badge throughout their model life. The last year GM imported European-made Opels into the United States, under their mark, was 1975. In that year the only Opels imported were the Manta and Ascona A. The Manta was normally equipped with a 1.6 Euro 1.9-litre CIH engines, although in Europe a small 1.2-litre motor was also offered. All Mantas sold in the US had the 1.9L and larger heavy-duty radiator. It came with either a 4-speed manual or an optional 3-speed TH180 automatic. The Manta was known to be one of the best-handling cars in its class and went on to win a large number of rallies in Europe and the United States. In the US market, there was a sport model known as the Rally from 1971 to 1974. The Rally model was overall in appearance and gauge package. The most noticeable difference was the addition of a black hood and on 1970 Euro 73 models the addition of fog lamps. Mechanically the only difference was the gear ratio in the models with manual transmissions, and the Rally model came with standard stiffer suspension, tighter turning radius, and very aggressive front caster adjustments. Both had dual rear sway bars, providing the best-in-class handling. In 1973 and 1974 there was also the Luxus model which included refinements like corduroy seats, color-coded interiors, and faux wood paneling. The only special edition Manta ever produced for the US market was the Blue Max in 1973. This amounted to a blue 1973 Luxus model, with a unique dark blue vinyl roof, mechanical sunroof, and automatic transmission. In 1975, all Manta and 1900 models were equipped with the Bosch L-Jetronic fuel injection in the United States due to emission regulations. Yet in Europe this feature was only available on the high-end GTE models, which also sported fog lamps and a lower front spoiler, which was not offered on any of the US spec Manta models. Also of notice that the 1974 Euro 75 Opel Manta models sported large aluminium 5 mph bumpers to comply with US crash standards of the time. The European Mantas did not receive the large bumpers. With the Deutsche Mark becoming stronger, and with other costs also rising, US imports of Opels ended in 1975. Instead, the Isuzu Gemini version of the T-Car was imported from Japan and sold by Buick dealers as the Opel by Isuzu, later Buick Opel. The Opel name was last used in the US in 1979. The European market had a number of different versions of their own. Most were basic trim packages, the most popular being the Berlinetta, which was similar to the Luxus, but included rubber trim on the bumpers, vinyl roof, and other miscellaneous features. the one major exception being the 1975 Opel, which offered the GTE and a number of special editions based on the GTE. The GTE was a fuel-injected version of the European 1.9L and the performance figures were very impressive for the time. The most notable special editions models based on the GTE were the Black Magic, and the Swinger edition in white with an equally odd interior choice. Special Opel Manta A series cars. There were two different special models made of the Manta A. The primary objective was to increase the power of the car. Both projects started approximately at the same time. There was the Turbo Manta and the TE 2800. The Turbo Manta is the rarer of the two. Production was a total of 33 cars, with 5 of them being prototypes and the ones used for public relations. The Turbo Manta is actually a 1973 Stradins with a 1.9-litre S-spec engine, originally putting out 90 bhp. The British company Broadspeed was chosen to build the turbo cars, and eventually started building 5 left-hand drive cars for the German Opel AG. These cars were meant only as prototypes. Broadspeed came up with a somewhat special solution, and used a combination of a Holset 3LDG turbocharger, and a carburetor mounted inside a big plenum chamber. The engine itself was fitted with a thicker copper head gasket, and as such the compression ratio was lowered to 7.61. The outcome was a 1.9-litre engine which generated 156 bhp, with acceleration of 0–60 in 7.6 seconds. All 5 cars were in GM's Signalgelb sunflower yellow, and had a large black stripe on the side, where a sign said Turbo Manta. The downside to this was fuel consumption. The turbocharger had halved the economy of the car, and building it was also costly. Therefore Opel closed the project, leaving the 5 cars as the total production number. However, a British engineer at the DOT was so enthusiastic about the cars that he had DOT build an additional 28 cars. The cars were all based on the 1974 Berlinetta model, which was the luxury model, with a full gauge pack, automatic transmission, and alloy wheels. All 28 cars were black with vinyl roofing. The only thing identifying that the car was indeed a Turbo Manta was a small sign at the rear quarter of the rear wings saying Turbo. Very few of these cars still remain today. The TE 2800 was a totally different project that Opel refused to endorse. A Belgian company called Transea Europe Engineering also wanted to increase the engine power of the Manta A. Opel had previously tried a 6-cylinder engine layout in 1971 and 72, but with no success. The cars were deemed too expensive to build, and the market was overwhelmed at the time with big engine cars. But Transea Europe Engineering did not agree, and a 2.8-litre CIH-type engine was essentially taken from the Opel Commodore 2.8 GS model and fitted into the engine bay of the Manta 1.9 Stradins. The radiator, the bonnet, the entire front end of the car, the rear axle, and the transmission all needed to be changed. To solve this quickly, Transea Europe Engineering tried to get Opel to join the project using Opel's earlier experiences with the transformation, but with no luck. Even worse for Transea Europe, Opel didn't even want the Opel brand on the cars if the project ever got off the ground. Transea Europe Engineering therefore turned to Opel's #1 tuner of the time, Steinmetz. They supplied a new fiberglass bonnet with a large bulge on it to make room for the engine, a set of widened arches, and a special front bumper integrated with the lower front spoiler, all to make room for the dramatic changes that needed to be made to the car's front-end construction. Much of the front was cut out and replaced with other parts being mounted further to the ground in order to give room for the radiator. A closed radiator system was installed so that the radiator had a water tank in the engine bay. The engine was still the 2.8-litre unit from the Commodore GS, and this was originally fitted with 2 Zenith carburetors. The output was 142 bhp, and with the Commodore 4-speed manual gearbox and a 3.181 rear axle the car went from 0–60 mph in 7.5 seconds. A total of 79 cars were made and sold through Steinmetz in Germany, branded not as an Opel but as a TE 2800. All Opel badging was removed from the cars and replaced by the TE logo. Steinmetz offered a tune-up for rally and motorsport use. The tune-up consisted of porting and flowing the head, higher compression ratio, a race-spec camshaft, and triple carburetors, giving the car up to 230 bhp. Although the TE2800 is the fastest Manta A ever made, it isn't officially an Opel. It could outrun cars like the 911 Carrera of 1973 and the BMW 2002 Turbo from 1973, even though those cars had more engine power. The low weight of the Manta body shell and the combination of the right gear ratios was what gave the car its success. Unfortunately, the cars were too expensive, almost twice the price of a 105 bhp GTE in 1975. Very few of these cars exist today, as most were used in rally and motorsport events. Manta B, the second car to use the Manta name, was launched in August 1975. This two-door three-box car was mechanically based directly on the then newly redesigned Opel Ascona, but the overall design was influenced by the 1975 Chevrolet Monza. The Manta had more sporty styling, including a droop snoot nose not seen on the Ascona, which was similar to the UK equivalent of the Ascona, the Cavalier Mk1. The Vauxhall equivalent of the Manta was the Cavalier Mk1 Sportschatch and Cavalier Mk1 Coupé. Up till 1981, Vauxhall models were sold in continental Europe alongside Opel in 11 countries, resulting in the Vauxhall Cavalier Mk1 Sportschatch and Coupé as well as the saloon equivalent of the Ascona be competing against each other. Engines were available ranging from the small 1.2-litre OHV engine, the 1.6-litre CIH and the 1.9-litre CIH. Also in 1976, the GTE engine from the Manta A series was adapted into the Manta B program, spawning the GTE Manta B series. In 1979, the GTE had the engine replaced with the new 2.0-litre CIH and with a new designed Bosch oil injection system. Power output was now 110 picoseconds. The 1.9-litre engine gave way to the 2.0-litre S engine, which was aspirated by a Varijet 2 carburetor. This engine was the most used engine by Opel at the time, and was to be found in several Opel record cars. In 1977, a three-door hatchback version appeared to complement the existing two-door booted car. This shape was also not unique, being available on the Vauxhall Cavalier Sports Hatch variant. Both Manta versions received a facelift in 1982, which included a plastic front spoiler, side skirts for the GTE and XI models, a small wing at the rear and quadruple air intakes on the grille. Also, the 1.2, 1.6 and 1.9-litre engines were discontinued and replaced by the 1.3-litre OHC engine, the 1.8-litre OHC and the 2.0-litre S&E CIH engines. The GTE was renamed and was called XI from 1983. Production of the Manta continued well after the equivalent Ascona and Cavalier were replaced by a front-wheel drive model Ascona C. The Vauxhall Cavalier Mk1 Sportschatch and Coupé did not continue past 1981. In 1982, the 1.8-litre Opel Family 2 engine from the Ascona C was fitted in the Manta B, making a more economical Manta B to drive. It could run 14 km per litre and use unleaded fuel. The 1.8 was very popular and was in production for 5 years. The 2.0S models were discontinued in 1984 and only the XI was available with the large engine. In 1986, Opel released the last Manta B model, the Exclusive, giving it all of the best in equipment. Recaro seats with red cloth, grey leather-like interior and the full body pack known from the i200 models. This consisted of twin round headlights in a plastic cover, front spoiler and rear lower spoiler from Irma, side skirts and the known 3-split rear spoiler of the Manta 400 of weight on the rear at 200 km per hour. In the UK, the exclusive GTE models were available in colours such as Dolphin Grey with matching dark grey cloth seats with red piping. These also had the quad headlights, front spoiler but a rear bumper which housed the number plate, coupled with a black plastic strip between the rear light clusters. The rear spoiler was similar to the standard GTE. Opel finally ceased the production of the Manta B in 1988, only producing the XI Exclusive the last 2 years. Sales continued in 1989 until the Manta was replaced by the Opel Calibra. Today, these cars are hard to find and in original, good condition. Consequently, the value has risen considerably over the last few years. It has again become popular, because of its good looks and well-respected handling. Rally and special versions. In 1979 work began on a rally spec Opel. Both the Ascona B and the Manta B were used for this. Although the Ascona 400 model was the most successful of the two, largely due to better weight distribution, the fact still remains that the Manta 400 was a remarkable car. Opel joined forces with German tuner Irma and Cosworth in Britain, to make the 400. Cosworth was given the task to develop a 16-valve two-cam head for the CIH spec engine block, and Irma, who earlier in 1977 and 78 has proven that they knew their way around in Opel building the i2800, was to design the exterior and interior of the cars. The results were not bad. Opel however had problems with the engine. The first idea of using a 2.0-litre engine and then using the 16-valve head from Cosworth simply did not give enough power. The problem was that the heads had already been built, so the heads were made to fit on the CIH Type 4-cylinder engine block. So they built an unusual engine using a 2.0-litre engine block with an overbore and larger pistons, a crankshaft from the 2.3-litre diesel engine of same type, and ended with a 2.4-litre engine block. Mounting the 16-valve head on this gave a massive output, and the opportunity to make several tune-ups for the rally drivers. Opel delivered the first 23 specimens in 1981, which were recognizable by the two-slot front grille. The cars were delivered as both street cars and factory-tuned rally cars. The street cars, known as Phase 1 cars, were luxury versions of the known Manta B Coupe copyright. Although all the changes to give the body more strength were still implemented, the cars were delivered with all kinds of exclusive packaging. Recaro seats with big Opel badges on the cloth, Irma leather steering wheel, and even front light washers were mounted. The cars were all delivered in Arctic white color, with white Ronal lightweight 7x15 alloys. The engine was fitted with a Bosch LE injection system and power output was 144 bhp. The Phase 2 however was quite different. It had large extended arches front and rear made of exotic materials like carbon and Kevlar to keep the weight down, lightweight doors, bonnet, spoilers and windows. The wheels were still from Ronal but now measuring 8x15 front and 10x15 rear. The engine output was 230 bhp using a set of 48mm DCOE-style carburetors, and the cars could be delivered with different gearboxes from ZF and with different rear axle options like LSD. Phase 3, which is also a term used when talking about the i400S, was not a factory tune-up. Many racers of the time had their garages tune up the engine even further. Some made it across the 300 bhp mark, and even today, engines can be tuned to deliver just over 340 bhp still naturally aspirated. The Manta 400 was produced in a total of 245 specimens following the homologation regulations by FISA. But the i400 also spawned some other I models. The first was the i200, which basically was a XI model Manta B with most of the Manta 400's appearance. 700 were made and are still considered a collector's item. The i200 used a tuned 2.0e engine delivering 125 picoseconds. There was also the i240, which is rarer as only 300 were produced. It is fitted with the i400 engine block but using a normal 8-valve cast iron head from the 2.0e engine. First presented at the 1985 Geneva Salon, it delivers 136 picoseconds and claimed a 200 km/h. Also, Irma themselves tried building the Manta with their own specs. The reason they were used for the 400 project was that in 1977 they had taken a 1977 Manta B 1.9S and put in a 2.8-litre H-spec engine from the Opel Admiral of that time. Success was limited, even though the cars were on display at the 1977 Geneva Car Show. The cars had been painted in some special colors, giving it the nickname Paradiesvogel, because of the rainbow-like color theme on the cars. However, they did produce 28 specimens with the 2.8H engine delivering 150 bhp and 220 Nm. The cars are considered extremely rare today. After the success of the 400M, once again tried the six-cylinder layout. This time producing the most powerful man to be ever released on the public market, the i300. In 1985, Irma bought 29,400 cars from Opel, which were on stock. The cars had no gearbox or engine but were fitted with the Phase 2 equipment. Irma installed the new 3.0-litre LE engine from the Monza and Senator models, which delivered 176 picoseconds and 232 Nm. Power was transmitted to a big Getrag 265 gearbox, onto a 3.181 LSD rear axle, giving the car some awesome specifications. 0 to 60 miles per hour was over within just 8 seconds flat, and the car topped out at 225 kilometers per hour, making it the fastest street Manta ever built. If not for the big 1980s fuel crisis being at its worst at that time, several are sure that Opel would have adapted the idea and built a series of six-cylinder Mantas. But instead they chose to build the economically more affordable Manta B with a 1.8-litre alloy head OHC-style engine in 1985. Convertible versions. Vauxhall, from 1978 until 1979, offered the Cavalier Coupe in convertible format called the Centaur. Only 118 of these were made and fewer than 30 are believed to survive as of 2007. About a quarter of these conversions were built using a Manta, rather than Vauxhall basis. The cars were developed by McGraw Engineering and sold through Vauxhall dealerships on behalf of Crayford Engineering. See also, Manta joke. Sources and further reading. External links: www.mantaclub.org, Opel Manta Owners Club UK, Vauxhall Cavalier and Chevette Club.